you so much for joining us. We are super excited to have you and would love to start by telling you a little bit about the Water Hub for those who haven't worked with us before. We are basically a pro bono communication shop for the water movement. We provide free communications help for a range of groups who are working to advance water justice and resilience. And that can look like training and coaching, writing, graphic design, messaging and media and digital strategy, and thought partnership. And we are currently focused in the Western United States because that is where our grant funding is. We'd love to take a moment to introduce you to the presenters, and thanks to those of you who are continuing to introduce yourselves in the chat. It definitely helps us to know who's on the call. I'm Nicole Lampe, Managing Director with the Water Hub. I use she, her pronouns, and I am in Portland, Oregon on Cowlitz and Clackamas lands. Jessica.
Hi, just was unmuting myself there. Hi, Jessica. I'm with the Water Hub as well. I'm the digital director and I use she, her pronouns, and I am coming in from LA on Tongva lands here in California.
Wonderful, thank you. And we're also joined by Sarah Bucci and Kimiko Martinez, two other members of the Water Hub team. And actually, since we have, thank you both for being here, Kimiko on the line. Kimiko, does it work now for you to share a little bit about our upcoming roundtable, or would you prefer to do that at the end? I think Kimiko's in transit, so she'll give a quick preview of the next workshop that we are offering, which is more of a casual discussion at the end of the call. So plan for today is to talk a little bit about why Soundbites, like why is it important to have really tight, brief language to describe your issues, just sort of defining them and looking at the elements. We will look at some examples to pull out like what makes a soundbite really work, what makes it stick in people's memories. And then we're going to do some practice and Q&A at the end. And first, I'd love to have Jessica talk a little bit more about why soundbites are increasingly relevant right now.
Yes, I think that we can all attest that the struggle is real in the media landscape and online too. So why are soundbites important? Well, now more than ever, people's attention spans are quite short. If I recall, there was a timepiece that was released a few years ago that actually said that folks' attention is now literally shorter than a goldfish. So you have seconds to get people's attention if you're lucky. So so we're living in the short attention span world, and the formats that most people are going to for their news is often broadcast TV and social media on their mobile devices. So these are formats that definitely are integral to have short, quippy sound bites. The average length of a TV news story is just 41 seconds, and that includes the setup and the sound bites. So the shorter you can have the package of what you're trying to deliver in your message, the better. And then on social, I mean, I think we can all attest and are a little guilty of scrolling quickly, gleaning what you can. And if something is punchy enough, maybe you'll tap through to learn more. But so many folks are just looking at headlines and quick descriptions, social captions to try to get the highlights and moving on. So this is why more and more it's really important to whatever you put out, whether you're placed or not, to make sure that the message is in there and is punchy enough that people will remember it later. Slide, please. So, but don't despair. You might find this a little depressing or daunting, but you don't have to rely on these channels all the time. However, they are excellent tools to use to repurpose, repackage your sound bites and we should take advantage of the reach and the opportunities they present to us. And, you know, in the case of social, offers some level of accessibility as well, and lowers a barrier to entry for people to, you know, access your message, be exposed to your programs. So making sure that you're using, again, powerful sound bites, really good imagery to catch people's attention and draw them in can really help them get involved and care about your issue. Nicole?
Thanks, Jessica. So before we talk about like the formula for building a soundbite, I thought we'd look at a few that have caught my attention over the past couple of weeks. Starting with this one from Monica Lewis Patrick of We the People Detroit. She was talking to Nina Lakhani in The Guardian and said, water is a human right, but our current water systems are a breeding ground for environmental racism and trauma. Next, from Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha from Flint, Michigan, she told Bloomberg Law, we've known for centuries that lead is a poison, but across our country, lead is like the straw through which we're getting drinking water. And then lastly, a really brief one from Jonathan Nelson of Community Water Center, as said to the Fresno Bee, water is basic PPE, or personal protective equipment. And this is a soundbite that makes me feel particularly excited. I know there are some Community Water Center folks on the call. The Water Hub got to work with them to elevate the issue of water debt in California and fight for affordability supports. And this is actually that subject line that we wrote for a news pitch about water debt that was then turned into a headline in one of the newspaper stories, as well as a quote in a couple of them. So that's the power of a soundbite. When you sum up an issue really succinctly in a way that people can feel because it is easily relatable to their lives, it sticks and it tends to travel. And that's the goal. So what do you notice about these? Breeding ground for racism and trauma, a straw through which we drink, basic PPE. Feel free to share in the chat what stands out to you that they have in common or that feels powerful and memorable. Yes, Jerry, they are short. Yeah, and even you'll notice I highlighted pieces of the quotes because there were sort of images that stood out to me from each. Yes, Debbie brings to mind imagery and yeah, visual, felt, metaphors. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of the things that stood out to me, as you all have named, they're visual, right? They call to mind a picture. They tend to pack an emotional punch. Like I can feel into the idea of personal protective equipment now during the pandemic, especially because it's about our collective health and safety. It's also about protecting others, being a good neighbor, being a good family member. Yes. And relatedly taps into shared values. So it's something that like I can connect to my life and things that I care about. The last thing I want to say is that it can stand alone. So that water is PPE, like snippet. I'll share in a bit. It was part of a longer quote, but those snippets that are really memorable, that are just a handful of words, are the things that people tend to retain and then reshare. And those are like the keywords and phrases that we're aiming to find for our issues. So let's talk about the formula. Before we talk about elements of soundbite, I just want to clarify that a soundbite is not a message. We talk a lot at the Water Hub about like crafting the message for your issue. And ideally, a message is like the story of your issue in Cliff Notes version. So it's meant to really encapsulate all the key points that people need to understand about what's at stake and what we can do. By contrast, sound bites are just a teaser. They probably won't address all of the elements. They're just meant to draw people in with the goal of having them want to learn more and get involved. And so if you try to cram all the elements of a message into a soundbite, you're going to end up with something unwieldy that, rather than being like short and memorable, is instead overwhelming. Just quickly, the elements of message are values, again, a problem or threat facing those values, what we can do about it or the solution, and a call to action. The soundbite often focuses on just one of these. So you might address all of those issues, for instance, in the space of a media interview or hearing testimony or a Twitter thread or a blog post. But hopefully, when covering all those issues, there are a couple of snippets that really stand out as memorable, that use that visual language, that emotive language, et cetera. So when I set out to like prepare a colleague for an interview, I often start with like concerns and feelings. So first, ask, how will you draw people in? What's on their mind that if you tap into it, they will take notice? And that could be things like the season. It could be things like the pandemic. It could be things like unemployment, flooding, drought in the West, the infrastructure debate. So that's the sort of like timely hook. And then the next question I ask is, what do you want to leave people with? A feeling or a call to action? And I just want to acknowledge the issues you all work on, we all work on, are complicated. Often there are a range of values at stake. And so it's tempting to list them, especially as different members of your audience may prioritize different ones. But I want to urge you to focus, because when I start talking about, I was literally just working on a media advisory. So I'll share a real example about water justice in Oregon. And there are issues ranging from shortages to flooding to rising water rates to contamination concerns. There's a whole laundry list of contaminants, from nitrates to heavy metals. And when it gets into the list, the emotional impact is diluted, and people tend to tune out, because when they're listening to it, when an editor is putting together, the script for a TV story, or when people are scrolling their Instagram feed, that block of text is way too much. So you have to focus. And I know that can be hard when you're deeply invested and when you know all of the issues at stake, but I would really urge you to pick one. So we'd love to hear from you as media consumers. What feelings tend to draw you in when you're scanning your social media feeds, skimming TV news? What makes you stop and want to learn more? Just a second, I need to stop sharing to launch the poll. Okay. Got about half the people have responded so far, so we'll just give it another few minutes. All right. So urgency is the winner. And then hope, anger, and joy are behind that, with fear as the sort of least engaging emotion in social media content. And we're going to ask you shortly whether the emotions that tend to engage you as an audience member are the same ones that your organization tends to use. Because we often notice that there's a disconnect. Well, first, I just want to share a little bit of what the social science research says. And there's lots, I sort of, as you know, probably about any sort of social research, there's a whole lot and often sort of conflicting results. And so these sort of like top lines are taken both from social science research about like what causes people to what kinds of emotional emotions and communication content leads to civic engagement, but also to social sharing. And there seems to be consensus around the fact that high arousal emotions like awe, fear, and anger generate more engagement. Like the stronger the feeling, the more likely you are to react. Online, there is good indication that people are more likely to share good news. And I think that is maybe especially true these days when we're all overwhelmed by doom and gloom. And then one more thing that I want to call out, and we have a link to this study in the summary we'll send out, is that crisis framing, which is really easy to do when you're working on issues as urgent as water contamination, water shortages, or water shutoffs, or salmon extinction. Crisis framing can make people tune out and shut down. And so while you all said that you are like engaged by urgency, I think we need to use urgency thoughtfully, especially when our audiences may already be living with a lot of trauma, and we want to be ethical communicators in addition to effective communicators. So I want to share the rest of that Jonathan Nelson quote. He said, water is basic PPE. And then he went on to say, if we don't act soon, 1.6 million households could experience a drinking water crisis. What emotions does that bring up for you? Sorry, while I'm waiting for folks to reply, Jerry had asked, what is crisis framing? So crisis framing is like urgency, like the sky is falling. This is a huge problem that is upon us. And if we don't act quickly, a lot of people are going to be harmed. Broadly, that's true for most of our issues, right? Our water challenges have risen to crisis level. So I don't want to diminish that or to be insincere. I think the call or the sort of recommendation that I would make is to balance that sense of urgency with a sense of constructive hope that there are, in fact, solutions at hand that are already being implemented in many places, and that if we act with urgency, we can get ahead of some of these challenges. So I want to share an alternative version of this quote. What if instead of saying 1.6 million Californians are in trouble, Jonathan had said, universal water access is within reach? Again, as I shared it in the context of the initial soundbite, Community Water Center was working on it, in fact, is on its way to securing low-income ratepayer supports and shutoff protections in California. So in fact, the solutions are at hand in that state. And I just want to call attention to the different feeling that we're left with when we hear like, yes, the solution is within reach versus a whole lot of people are going to be harmed. And there's no one that's right or wrong. It's just a strategic choice. And it also will depend on your audience. So next poll, I'd love to hear what emotions your organization tends to lean on when you are preparing for an interview, when you're writing blog posts, press releases, etc. Okay, oops. Okay, next poll. What emotions does your organization's content tend to elicit? More joy and hope, or are you more on the fear, anger, and urgency end? Seeing a lot of urgency, but a good amount of hope. I'll share the results in just a moment.
We see 18 out of 23.
All right. So again, this was a most often poll, and urgency and hope. I'm actually pleasantly surprised that people are leading with hope on our issues. That's great to hear. And again, I think it can be really effective. So in addition to being tapping into feelings, I want to make an appeal for using really like tangible sights, smells, sounds, language. So harmful algal blooms are an issue that I've been working on for a while. And we often hear, you can variously describe them as like cyanobacteria or toxic algae or HABs, none of which mean a whole lot to the average person, or you can talk about smelly green slime of summer. Or, as Circle of Blue recently did in a story about Clear Lake's harmful algal blooms, they asked neighbors, what does the slime smell like in the summertime for those who live nearby? And people variously said things like kimchi, dog poop, baby diapers, sewage. They described how it stuck to their pet's fur, how it like clung to the shore. So that's sort of like real visual sensory language. I think it means a whole lot more to me as a consumer of information. And then similarly, in service of making it relatable, metaphors can often call to mind an image and also tap into at times like a feeling. So rain gardens as a sponge to me isn't just a good way to describe the fact that they help soak up rain, but I also have this sense that sponges, like the utility of sponges are something good that provides a valuable service to us. And so there often is a lot of meaning layered in to metaphors. And just one more tip when you're constructing your sound bites, I know a lot of you are involved in crafting policy language and regulatory hearings, and you're technical experts. And so it can be tempting to use that technical language when we're describing our issues, especially if you're required to in some contexts. But that technical language is not only inaccessible to some audiences, it also tends to sterilize our issues, sanitize them, take the feeling and the humanity out. So talking about stakeholders is way different than talking about neighbors. Talking about recreational users is way different than talking about families that camp there every summer. Similarly, talking about health impacts is very different than saying kids with asthma or kids that are going to have lifelong learning challenges. So the more specific you can be, the better. And I'd love for folks to share on the chat if you have some issues that you tend to talk about in technical terms and sort of language that you struggle with. We would love to hear. And next, Jessica is going to share a little bit about like what you can do with sound bites, having crafted them, and then we'll do some Q&A in practice. But if anyone has examples of like, oh, we totally use this language that is maybe not the most accessible or the most emotive or visual, we'd love to hear.
I can say that I definitely have worked with some policy folks that have used the word or the acronym ERWIMPs in conversation. So that's fun. Or really getting stuck on saying gray infrastructure over and over again. And that doesn't really paint a picture, does it?
Right. Yeah, so Natalie said water quality impairments. Yep. Best management practices, TMDLs. Issues explaining in the legislative process when a call to action isn't that immediate. Yes, that the process piece can be really challenging. My approach generally to communicating about policy is to focus less on the process and more on the payoff. But when you're communicating with your base of supporters and they need, you're asking them, for instance, to contact their lawmakers, there is a certain amount of process language that, is sometimes appropriate for context. And we're totally happy to strategize about this. But I would just say, like, sharing a little bit about the steps along the way and how they get us closer to the relief or support that people need, like always in the context of what's the get for your community versus just this hearing is coming up, it's going before it, going before appropriations. So thanks for that. And as Jessica's about to explore a little bit, having crafted a soundbite, like don't hesitate to reuse it, because it takes repetition to make language stick. And while, you know, it may feel sort of rote to you to say again and again in the context of different interviews or blog posts or Twitter and Instagram content that water is personal protective equipment, that sort of repetition helps to make our language like break through a whole lot of different messages. And if you're working in coalition and can get the entire coalition to use similar language, that can be even more powerful.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was a great deep dive. Yes, and just to reiterate what she just said, to not be shy, definitely repeat yourself quite a bit, because it takes many, many touch points for people to remember something and hold on to it. So you need to repeat your message across different channels and different formats. And then you'll start to notice, maybe it'll start to get into people's vocabulary and lexicon that they just start to repeat on their own, not really even realizing that it was something that they heard from you, and it becomes more widely used language, which is definitely the dream, right? So now, once you've done all this work, you know, putting a lot of thought and intention and practice behind all of these powerful sound bites that you're hoping to deliver in interviews, it doesn't have to stop there. Whether or not you got placement, whether you got that broadcast piece, or if you were interviewed by a journalist, you can still use your sound bites, you know, in both contexts. So there's no need to, you know, put in extra footwork, work smart, not hard. And you can use that short, quippy text for your digital channels and across different formats, which we'll discuss. And remember, like, this is just the beginning. People are still getting their information. Just to recap what we said at the top, people are still going to social on their mobile devices, watching television. So meeting your audience where they're at, which is oftentimes social media these days, is a great way to maximize the work that you've already done and to drive those messages distilled home. Great. So how does this look? How does this show up on social? It's not just a caption. There's so many other things that you can do with that great soundbite content. It can start with, you know, inspiration for your post copy. So if you're going to be posting a link to your interview or your news piece, you already have some content that you can use to help elevate and, again, drive in another opportunity to get your word out that you may have already said in your interview, but is the hook to get people to also click through and read or watch your interview. Or if you didn't get the interview and you decide to draft up a blog post instead, again, you can use those sound bites to help guide that content and that storytelling. It's a post for that as well. So just consider it as prep social copy for when you have something go live that's already in your voice. You can also create quote cards. So we have an example here from an amazing community organizer out of North Carolina who's fighting around food justice and environmental racism. Her name is Naima Mohammed. Shout out to her. Please check out her work. So yes, here's a quote from her, this amazing movement leader. And it's powerful, right? Because we're also visual animals. We react very well to when things are easy to glean and are visual. So you can repurpose your sound bites into these quote cards that you can use across Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It doesn't matter. And it's a great opportunity, again, to repackage content and work that you've already done. Another option you have, if you want to get more legs out of, say you have a series of quotes or sound bites that you've put together and you have a news piece that came out, you can do a threaded tweet. So start it off with the announcement, and then you can put more and more tweets below using those quotes to kind of guide people along. And if you want to get creative, say you made a quote card, you can mix it up. So it's a combination of text and images to get people to guide their eyes through the story. Another opportunity that you could do on another channel is on Instagram. More and more, I'm seeing progressive accounts that are putting out content on their Instagram stories for things that are in real time and breaking, or as an opportunity to reiterate something that came out that they linked to in their bio, or as if you're trying to tease a piece and you have the opportunity and that functionality to do a swipe up if you have 10,000 or more followers. It's a great way. Think of it in a way like a threaded tweet, where you have a series of slides with quotes and images if you want, with calls to action multiple times to either check the link in your bio or to swipe up and to learn more, either to your blog post, to the news piece, to the broadcast piece. It doesn't matter, but it's great to get mileage out of your content and your sound bites online. Next, please. Oh, there we go. So I just want to invite all of y'all to also think outside of the box if you have capacity, and to explore new formats and new emerging platforms. It's great because it's a low stakes opportunity to experiment and get playful and not be afraid of, making mistakes. We're all human. People genuinely want to relate to other human beings. And while the work that people do in the water movement can be technical, like Nicole said, can be, policy heavy, at the end of the day, the way to get people to move hearts and minds is for them to actually have a relationship and a human connection. You're going to have more success with your campaigns. So what does that look like on social? I would say live video, number one, is a great tool. You can do this on Facebook, you can do it on Instagram. Even Twitter has some functionality around it. LinkedIn has some functionality. You have to do some vetting, but you can go live on YouTube. And what's really cool is we're all fighting the algorithm. It's real. It's difficult, especially on a limited budget where you don't have a lot of resources to put dollars behind your content. The nice thing is it kind of circumvents that algorithm monster. So what happens is people are online, you go live, it is the only thing really that will get a push notification to your audience to let them know that you're live, tune in, and you can have that back and forth two-way dialogue with people. They can ask you questions. You can do pre-promotion if you want. You can use your sound bites as an opportunity to, again, deliver your message again in a different format, again and again, to repeat yourself so that it really sinks in with people, and as an opportunity to either expand on a broadcast piece or a piece that you were interviewed for, which they only might have taken 1 or 2 sound bites for, but you can expand that conversation in a longer format online. So if to dig in more, to dig into the story more, your expertise. It's also an opportunity, again, in terms of human connection, if you have some policy staff that want to break down something for people to better understand, or you have a community member that's a super volunteer and you want to give them love and highlight what they're doing, or your ED, you want to build a persona around your leadership, this is a great tool. And again, it's not high stakes. You can make mistakes. We do too when we're giving trainings, and that can come off as authentic and accessible, and it can build trust also. The last thing I'll say around emerging platforms are to try different formats. Like in the case of Clubhouse, if you haven't heard of it, it's a live tool, but it's audio only. So it's like a podcast in a way, but in real time. And people get notified when you start chatting. You can invite people to join the chat, and you can facilitate it, and you can have people invite them to speak, contribute. They can just listen, check it out if you want to learn more. It's a fun platform that's emerging that would be a great opportunity to deliver your sound bites in a different way. And the last thing I just want to mention with live video is you can record it. You can upload that again as a piece of content. You can cut it up and have clips that you can use for multiple ways to promote. And there's a couple other ways you can use it. There's also cool tools I just wanted to share, like Restream. There are others called like PodChat Live, and where you can simulcast to multiple platforms at the same time, which is a great tool. And some of them are free, some of them have cheap monthly plans, but it's also nice to kind of maximize and work smart, not hard. If you have a YouTube channel, a Facebook channel, to just go live at one time. So next, the other opportunity that you could have with your sound bites is, again, like we said, if you didn't get placed, that's okay. You have content now to craft a blog post, still, telling that story and elevating those issues and those important talking points and sound bites. And to make it even easier for people to read, sound bites lend themselves really well to a listicle format. So you could say 3 reasons why, you should care about this pocket park with a rain garden in your neighborhood, or 3 reasons why we want you to contact the governor on XYZ bill and to advocate for that. So they're perfect for that. All you have to do is write a little intro, have your sound bites as your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how many ever, a little conclusion and a call to action, and you have a blog post and you can share it. So that's a listicle format. You can also use them for, you can use them as a theme for an email alert. Say you have an action alert you want to send out quickly to your constituents, and you want them to quickly understand why you want them to take action. Sound bites are perfect for that. Or you can include them in your newsletter, again, for shaping your content and your theme of your newsletter, to tell a story, for blurbs, etc., to give it some richness and some punchiness that will serve itself well across the email format. So I've been chatting a lot, and I just want to invite all of you to, if you have any questions, I know that I covered a lot of ground, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you have any experiences you want to share, feel free.
Thanks, Jessica. And we'll just hold here for a moment for questions. We do have a little practice guide, and are going to invite people who want to hang on to write some sound bites and then share them in the chat. And we have that little formula. But if you have questions that have arisen while we were talking, we'd love to hear them. Is there a preferred length for sound bites? Well, it depends on the utility. So I think that, media quotes in print stories tend to be like 1 to 3 lines long. And on TV and radio, they really vary. You could have a clip of an interview that is, a sentence or 2. But when we're talking about sound bites, we're talking about that part of the quote that is like memorable and repeatable. Yeah, and as Kimiko said in the chat, if it fits in a tweet, you're probably on the right track. But I think the piece that takes the most brainstorming, but that also provides the most mileage, are those little metaphors or images. That language that you can, so I'll share an example while folks are thinking / chatting. We just did a media training with Pacoima Beautiful in Los Angeles, and we were talking about the local airport there and the nuisance. And there's lots of reasons that this airport is a challenge for the neighbors. And we were doing practice interviews, at first everyone was listing the challenges, and then Veronica there said, I'm thinking of Doña Eva, and I'm thinking of her. Imagine there's no curfew for this airport. Planes are flying overhead 24/7 while kids are doing homework. They're on class calls. You're having family meals. Your phone calls get interrupted. Your kid's sleep is interrupted. So all of that is memorable to me. But the thing that stood out is like, there's no curfew 24/7. Like a noisy business in your neighborhood that operates around the clock is like an image and an idea that will stick with me. Jerry, do these tips also apply to written content that's not a soundbite, like a press release or report? Absolutely. I mean, going for emotion, tapping into value, using relatable, non-technical language, and focusing on an aspect of the issue that is really pressing and timely versus the laundry list, I think all help and are relevant pieces of advice for pretty much any media content. Let's look at the practice. And then if other questions come up while you're doing it, don't hesitate to chat us. So here, just in like a thumbnail, is what we suggest for prepping your sound bites. So first thinking of your issue and then deciding what concern and feeling you want to tap into. And then rather than trying to write the whole thing at once, I start with those metaphors, those images, because those are the things that are likely to stick. So, the black snake is a pipeline, the rain garden is a sponge, the lead pipes is a straw. Using simple language that's also sensory. And as Kimiko said in the chat, aiming for tweet length. So we'd love to give you like 5 to 7 minutes to just play with language, with keywords and phrases, and knit them together into, it doesn't even have to be a full sentence. It could just be like that sort of image. But anything that feels really evocative and memorable that you could use to help people feel into and understand your issue. Seeing a question from Sam. Any tips on helping people deprogram themselves from being too close to a policy issue and how to think more literally? The tip that Veronica shared on the Proclaim Beautiful training was that it helped her to think about a neighbor. So thinking about a person who's impacted and their experience of the issue, I think can help. Also, if you as an advocate or expert have, visited the site, for instance, or studied the impacts, then describing it personally. Like, I was blown away by the smell when I approached Clear Lake, or I was really struck by how quiet and empty the shores were on a summer day when people would ordinarily be picnicking. And so those aren't sound bites yet, but making it like putting your shoes and your head into the issue as opposed to like zooming out to the big picture, I think can help. And Sarah, Kimiko, and Jessica, please feel free to pile on, share your thoughts.
One kind of fun play on words that I had, experimented with in the past around, there was a lawsuit that was, brought against the city of LA about around ADA compliance of the sidewalks, because there were trees that were the wrong species planted in the wrong place that were busting up the sidewalks. So to help raise awareness about that with the correct trees and without getting wonky, just thinking about moving from concrete to canopy, and just saying that a lot, like concrete to canopy. And again, but saying, and the right tree in the right place at the right time, and trying to say things like that when in relation to these bigger lawsuits and policy, opportunities. And yeah, so that was something that we played around with a lot.
I love that. I also, in the context of urban greening, I also often talk about from pavement to plants, more alliteration. I happen to really love alliteration and have to like manage my own love of it. But yeah, those simple, like, it's not about, impermeable surfaces to promote infiltration. It's about what do people see and experience. just give it like 2 more minutes, and then we'd love to hear what Soundbites you're cooking up / working with.
Sure. Another tip and just a little anecdote is I used to work in an organization that was focused on the impacts of corporate animal agriculture on climate. And as we may know, but folks don't relate to tons of carbon sequestered or the carbon emissions, and most people they don't care, B, they don't know what that means, and feel like they're being talked down to, and you're creating a barrier when there shouldn't be. So what we would do instead, and our message was, okay, if you eat one plant-based meal a day for a year, you will save the carbon equivalent of driving from LA to New York. So if I could give a tip, is if you have something that's quantifiable, try to turn it into something that's relatable and visual, right? So if you can quantify, okay, we know we have this much carbon, how can we convert that? There are some tools online, especially around carbon emissions, that you can look into that translate things into real world terms. So that was another thing. Or if you are talking about water, how many Olympic, size swimming pools are people saving from conserving X amount of water a month? That's another thing you could play around with.
We're going to invite everyone on screen, those that want to share. So rather than just having to share your sound bites in chat, if you're comfortable sharing it, speaking out, unmuting and sharing it, that would be great. And Sarah's just going to make everyone.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand. There you go, right?
Yes.
Raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can share.
And also, we're happy to workshop. We're not expecting you to have cooked up the perfect soundbite in 6 minutes. And it often, like writing headlines or email subject lines, often the best ideas come like 25th. So often when we at the Water Hub are trying to come up with like a quote or a headline or an image or metaphor, we will literally in like our chat tool Slack, like just, create a thread and like throughout the course of the day, plop ideas in there. So I think it helps to invite more brains and then to just keep chipping, like letting it run, letting your like brain run in background. And then the best idea pops into you when you're watering the garden or something. Any brave souls want to share?
While we're waiting, I know our issues don't always lend themselves to like cutesy lines, which is probably one of the challenges in terms of this. Oh, we've got someone. Never mind.
Malika, please share. Thank you for being brave.
Well, okay. I don't have one, but I would love help.
Okay.
So we're starting a campaign around green infrastructure and redoing all of our stormwater systems, which is pretty wonky. And we haven't started it yet. So this is a good one to think about. But I was trying to think of a good metaphor for either how dirty the water is because of our dilapidated stormwater or something positive. But yeah, I couldn't think of something. So I don't know if you guys have any ideas.
So you're looking for a metaphor for stormwater, for like urban runoff?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Or why we need to, yeah. So it could either be negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's the current situation and how dirty our water is and our oceans are and our bays because of our stormwater system. Or it could be, I guess, a positive metaphor about what it could be like with a new stormwater system. But I was struggling to think of metaphors. And like you said, probably will come to me later. And I don't want to take up the airwaves if someone else has one they do want to share.
This is a great one.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you, Nicole.
Please.
I was just going to say that with stormwater, to kind of re-envision what stormwater could be, I've used kind of terminology like, let's capture the rain where it falls instead of purging it to the ocean, like let's imagine the abundance and, that we could create if we just captured the rain where it, where it came. And you can get into the details and nitty gritty, but I think that paints a picture and can like add some inspiration about, imagine the possibilities that we could protect ourselves against drought. We could keep our oceans clean. We could be more resilient if we captured the rain where it fell. It's an amazing, precious resource, right?
Yeah. No, I like that.
And this isn't yet a metaphor, but I think like people can relate to like the sidewalk and, roads and yards being dirty, right? They know that what they put on their lawns, they know that they wouldn't pick up, like something they dropped on the sidewalk and put it in their mouth. So just like tapping into like, what's on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And do you really want all that stuff to be washing in to the ocean where you swim? So again, like I don't have a metaphor at hand, and that's the sort of thing that I think takes time to cook up, but just like helping people tap into their experience of the outside world being dirty and having lots of things that they don't want to be drinking and they don't want to be swimming in.
Yeah, I like that. Very visual. Thank
you.
Ooh,
Sarah said, if you wouldn't track it off the sidewalk into your house, it shouldn't get into your water. Love. Yeah. Kamiko licking the sidewalk. Kamiko also had a great tip that she keeps a list, and there are actually a couple of lists around. We should probably put one on our blog of like water related metaphors and puns and things to insert in. Our newsletter, by the way, has lots of wonderful water puns. Thanks to Jessica. If you haven't subscribed, we'll share the link out when we